Warning. Money's Crazy Mind contains language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised, but will be completely ignored.
I'm sick of it, doing right, doing wrong. Parents pissed off every time I write a song. Smoke, crack, worship Satan, what the fuck is that? It's something funny, made for you to laugh at.
You're destroying America with your rap.
You're so full of shit, I need to call hazmat. The only way I would ever apologize
I gotta go
if
on
I
record
had
with
my
this,
face
all right?
buried
I
in your
really
sister's
do.
thighs.
Never in 39 years have I ever seen anything like
Okay, I'm sorry
It
for what
shows
it's worth,
the
but the best
fanaticism
part of you was the
of this fan
afterbirth.
base and
If you
crazy
can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. Na 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 na
Into the
na
return
na
of
na na,
Snoop.
and I fucked your
To the point
sister.
where he
You
overshadowed
can't
the
take a fucking joke, then go jump in
Of
the
Randy
river. La 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 la
That it was
la
kind
la
of,
la,
for me,
and I fucked your sister.
if you want to continue to put this narrative out there that Cody finishing the story
Hey,
is
yo,
this
he's talking
big
shit.
daunting
What the fuck
task,
is this? Hey,
and
this
Cody
fucking
has
shit.
all these
Run
mountains
your
to
mouth.
climb and
This
all
is
these
what you're
brass
gonna
rings
get.
to
Screwdriver
climb.
jam in your
And of course, we gotta
fucking
thank our
eye.
official music
Think
sponsor,
I'm coming
Psych
by.
Ward,
Tell your
for the
sister,
continued
I'll be
use
over by
of
10 with my dick in
funny
the mouth and my balls on her chin. She's bobbing her head to this fucking beat. Damn, dog, man, your sister's a freak. Hey, baby, you like the Eagles? Wanna hear something?
Oh, you guys hear it? The Psych Ward is playing. It's a little quiet, so let's turn it up a little bit. But you guys hear it? That means Spooktacular Night 2 is on the horizon. We are back. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube. And for the second night in a row, we are live on Keze Radio. Welcome back into the asylum, ladies and gentlemen. I, of course, am too hot to handle, too cold to hold. You call the Ghostbusters and you see their logo right there because they in control. Lee, mother, money, back with you. Night number 2, finishing up the All Hallows Eve Spooktacular 2024. Discussing the Menendez Brothers, discussing the craziness that was the Menendez Brothers trials. Yesterday, if you remember, we went through the entire case history. What happened leading up to the murders? What happened during the murders? What happened during the investigation into the murders? What happened to make investigators start looking at the brothers? We looked at all of it. We looked at trial number 1 that ended in not 1, but 2 mistrials. We looked at trial number 2 where it was basically first-degree murder or nothing. We talked about how the O.J. Simpson trial tied into the decisions that were made for trial number 2. We looked into all of that. The only thing, moving the mic a little bit, the only thing we did not have time to get to was the appeals. So today, we're going to start by looking into the appeals that the brothers have filed over the years. We're going to look into an update that just happened within the past week. And then we are going to break down, or I'm going to break down, I should say, this case, the way I think it went and the way everything kind of fell into place. And we're going to do that 3 different ways. We're going to look at it, 1, by the evidence that was found during the police's investigation. 2, we're going to take a look at some of the things that were listed in the testimony, or mentioned, I should say, not listed, mentioned during the case testimony in the trials. And then 3, we're going to take a look and see if modern, or, well, actually, different cultural stigmas that existed back then versus cultural stigmas and changes that have happened now. And how all 3 of these things can give me a definitive determination on what I think happened in the Menendez Brothers trials. So let's start with the appeals. I got notes. See? Notes. People say that I don't do research. And then I have all the research from yesterday's episode, too. But I don't do research. Anyway. So for the appeals process, they started in 1998. February 27th, 1998, the California Court of Appeals upheld the brothers' murder conviction, and on May 28th, 1998, the Supreme Court of California declined to review the case, thus allowing the decision of the appellate court to stand. Both brothers filed a habeas corpus petition with the Supreme Court of California, which were denied in 1999. Having exhausted the appeal remedies in state court, they filed the appropriate and separate habeas corpus petitions in the United States District Court. On March 4th, 2003, a magistrate judge recommended the denial of the petitions. The district court adopted the recommendation. The brothers then decided to appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and on September 7th, 2005, a 3-judge panel denied both their habeas corpus petitions. In May of 2023, the brothers requested a new hearing based on an allegation that their father had raped former Menudo member Roy Rossellio, who at the time was signed under RCA Records. Specifically, on April 18th, 2003, on a segment of the Today Show about a television documentary, Rossellio stated that when he was 14 years old, he was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez while he was visiting the Menendez family's home in New Jersey. The appeal cites a letter allegedly written by Eric to his cousin Andy Cano in 1988, where Eric talked about the abuse. On October 3rd, 2024, Los Angeles District Attorney Judge George Gassion announced in a press conference that his office was actively reviewing the appeal. And then on October 24th, 2024, Judge Gassion announced that he was asking the court for a resentencing of the case. If a judge accepts his recommendation, the brothers will be eligible for parole. Gassion stated, "I don't believe that manslaughter would have been the appropriate charge given the premeditation that was involved. And I do believe that the brothers were subjected to a tremendous amount of dysfunction in the home and molestation. Gassion's recommendation considered the length of time the brothers had already served and their behavior while in prison. Okay, so that was actually the update that I was going to be talking about here, was the fact that the district attorney is looking into a resentencing for the brothers, given some new evidence that had been coming out. So, my final thoughts on the actual case. There have been so many scenarios that you can look at here, and this has been one of the most talked about, debated, and questioned cases in American crime history. This is one case I have wanted to cover since I decided to discuss true crime here on the show. And I want to take a look at the case from 3 different angles: evidence and investigation, testimony, and cultural changes and stigma then and now. So let's kind of start with evidence and investigation. There's quite a few different areas to look at when you focus on this part of the case. Mainly in that you can look at several mistakes that were made by law enforcement right at the beginning of the investigation. It's been a long-standing claim by the investigators that in familial cases, such as this one, that the guilty party is almost always related to the victim or victims. By not doing GSR testing on the brothers, it gave them a chance to further remove and destroy evidence in the case. In a recent jailhouse interview, Eric admitted that if they had been tested that night, that they would have been arrested on the spot. When I began investigating this case and read the initial alibi given by the brothers, it sounded like bullshit. When the admittance came out that the brothers lied about the mafia influence and that they were actually the perpetrators involved in the crime, it made the initial alibi that much weaker. So here's kind of where I came to that particular conclusion when it came to the brothers' alibis. When you initially hear it, they weren't home. They had just returned home. They found their parents brutally butchered, all of that. Okay, cool, great, whatever. But then when you hear, oh, we went to see Batman at this specific time. Well, where are your ticket stubs? Oh. We went to the Taste of LA. Okay, do you have any kind of, proof that you were at that particular festival? Oh. And yeah, I mean, there are definitely things that you can look at here and say, okay, maybe it is possible. They went to Batman, they threw the ticket stubs away. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown ticket stubs away to movies. Unless it's a movie that I'm like deeply invested in, like anything Ghostbusters, or, maybe even Batman or, anything like that. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to throw the ticket stub away. What do you need the ticket stub for? But then nowadays as well, you can just go back through here. Like if you purchase your tickets online, you can go on your phone, go into the app, or even to your email, and here's the receipt. Here's the showtime. Here's everything. And obviously back in 1989, you couldn't do that. So it's either you had the ticket stub or some level of receipt, or you had nothing. So that's kind of where I was leaning towards with that part of the evidence. the part where they went to go see Batman. There are lots of these moments sensationalized in dramatizations, most recently Monsters on Netflix. They go to the box office to buy the tickets for a showing that had already started. To try to help establish the timeline of the alibi. And then when the lady at the box office keeps saying, we can't do that. Once the film is started, we're not allowed to sell tickets, which is kind of the policy of every station movie theater out there. That was not the sound I was looking for. That wasn't either. I know it's on here. Yeah, I guess that'll do. Whatever. New board. Anyway. And then they go to the Taste of LA, and you kind of see them like hobnobbing with different like young women that were there, and even in some cases younger men that were around their age. And like they're trying to convince these people to sit there and be like, hey, I mean, we've been here for hours, right? And they're kind of flirting with the girls, and the Menendez brothers, they weren't bad looking men. I'm very comfortable enough in my sexuality to say that. So they weren't bad looking guys, so I mean, a cop walks up to you and says, do you remember seeing this guy? They're probably going to sit there, oh yeah, I saw them at the Taste of LA. Okay, were they there for a while? Let's say these girls had a little bit too much to drink. They're probably just going to remember the face, and they're going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, they were here, because you're not going to remember anything, and they're not going to want to admit that they got fucking plastered at the thing. Or they may even and just be like, I don't know, I was drunk, man. I don't know how long they were there. I just remember that face. And that's why eyewitness statements can be wishy-washy at times. The day after the murders, the boys went to the bank to empty the safe deposit box. They were allowed to go in alone and were not supervised. They emptied it. Apparently, according to family, and we talked about this yesterday, there was a extensive search in anything that Jose and Kitty owned to try to find the will. And the will, from what I understand, according to Menendez family members, was never really found. Or if there was one found, it was old. And that's where Lyle and Eric pretty much got everything. The cars the boys drove the night of the murder was never searched. Both Lyle and Eric admitted to in-person interviews the guns were in the car during the police search at home. According to police records, there were 2 shotguns that had never been fired in Jose's closet. Also, tons of prescription pills for Kitty for depression and other mental conditions. Kitty was suicidal and depressed all the time, which the boys did talk about multiple times in police interviews. Police records indicate that Jose was shot 6 times, Kitty 10. And then when talking with Eric's friend, police stated that Eric was never interested in money and never mentioned inheritance. Eric's prior charges for burglary were considered in thinking, and then Eric's old friend came back for revenge. And then the mafia theory was backed up by Jose's co-workers at Live Entertainment after Jose took over and wanted to shut down the pornography department, one of the most profitable departments at their time. Investigators quickly ruled out mob ties due to certain findings at the scene, mainly the lack of shotgun shells, that no professional hitman or professional murderer would have removed the shells from the scene. No sign of forced entry. There was a window that was broken, but not enough to warrant forced entry. And they also talked about the fact that when the boys were giving their statement to the police when they walked into the house, they could smell the gun smoke and that the room was still filled with smoke. If there had been forced entry and a window broken or anything like that, that smoke could have filtered out, and then the smell would have also filtered out. While investigators kept stating that everyone, including the brothers, were suspects, the brothers were never treated like suspects. The spending spree was a large part of making them prime suspects, while the family did tell investigators multiple times during multiple points of the investigation that the spending was nothing new. And it was Jose's live entertainment company card that a lot of the spending was actually done on. And live entertainment also provided Lyle and Eric with bodyguards as well. The brother's cousin also reported that while searching the house for Jose's will, he found a tape recorder with microphones going into both boys' rooms with a bunch of cassette tapes with their names on them. This is the only mention of these tapes. No other evidence exists of what is on them. When Eric was sent to Dr. Oziel after the burglaries, Jose had requested to know what was said in these sessions. Could these have been those tapes? When Oziel's mistress went to the police and told them about the tapes, this is when they zeroed in on Eric and Lyle. It was only after they heard the Oziel tapes that they started going after Eric and Lyle. After the DA confirmed that no privilege was violated, warrants were issued. There was an enormous amount of evidence to support the theory of the boys killing their parents for money. However, what about the 2 shotguns that were found in Jose's closet? What about the tapes that Henry found? The fact that the Beverly Hills police did not search Lyle's car or test for GSR could lend credence to the thought on the LAPD at the time. Also, rich people, rich privilege, right? So based on the evidence that we have here and based on the investigation that happened afterwards, when you have all these people that are coming out and saying, the boys killed their parents and that they admitted that they killed their parents. At no time whatsoever did any mention of money or inheritance or a will come up in any of the people that investigators spoke to. Not even family members. So family members did talk about a will, yes, and mainly only after they were asked about it by investigators. But it wasn't so much the fact that the boys wanted the will so bad or that the boys, were really interested in what the will said. It was never anything about Eric and Lyle want the will. It was just that the family was looking for the will to see what it said. To see what, if anything, Eric and Lyle were inheriting from Jose and Kitty. That is the only mention of a will that ever came up in any part of the investigation. During interviews with family members, and even Eric and Lyle, the thought of their mom being this depressed, suicidal, I just don't give a fuck about anything kind of woman did come up quite a bit. And the boys did mention that there were several times when they had to talk their mom off the ledge of suicide. The thought of putting her out of her misery, which is definitely something that the police thought of after they were arrested, there could be some backing to that. But the thought keeps coming into my head when we look at everything that was said during the investigation last night, and kind of this brief little retelling of some of the evidence that we talked about here. 2 nights before the boys murder their parents, they basically go to every gun store in LA County trying to purchase the weapons. And if they really were for like self-defense purposes or anything like that, why use a friend's stolen ID? And think about this. It wasn't even Eric's friend whose ID they were using. It was Lyle's. And Lyle stole it from him in Princeton. That he did tell investigators during police interviews. Not Lyle, but the friend. That his ID went missing when he was in Princeton, and it wasn't very long before Lyle came home around the time of the murders that it went missing. So Lyle steals the ID. But Eric is the one to go into the gun store to use the ID. Not only does that show a level of premeditation, but it also kind of shows the fact that this was a shared premeditation by both brothers. To lend even further evidence towards the premeditation, you are trying to establish an alibi. I will say that it was a very sloppily done way of trying to establish an alibi, because if it was always the plan to murder them on the 20th, you could have had Lyle or Eric stay home and had the other go to the box office and buy the tickets, so that way you already have the tickets. And then, if the idea always was to go... okay, so the Taste of LA thing was kind of like a spur of the moment kind of thing because the movie theater didn't work. But we also know from interviews with some of Lyle's friends that they were supposed to meet up with one of Lyle's friends after they went to go see Batman. That friend all of a sudden just wasn't answering his phone, so on and so forth. So they then had to be like, okay, what are we going to do? We were supposed to meet so-and-so here, but he didn't answer his phone. So we're going to end up going to the Taste of LA. So it kind of was like a, fuck, our alibi is falling apart, what are we going to do kind of situation. So that does kind of lead credence to maybe it wasn't as premeditated as the police were trying to make it out to be, to where like something definitely happened on that day and they're like, all right, we're going to have to take care of this now. Now what do we do? But here's the other part of it that definitely lends to some level of kind of premeditation, to where it always was the plan to do it that night. You knew you had to ditch your bloody clothes. You knew you had to ditch the guns. You knew you had to do this. You knew you had to do that. Why the hell are you sitting around in the house waiting for the cops to show up? What were you going to do? Run out the back door, back the car out of the driveway and drive off while you got fucking cops coming right at you? That don't sound too intelligent. But that does kind of point to some level of premeditation, where you're sitting here waiting for the cops. Dad's brain's on the floor next to me. It's been about 15 minutes. Cops ain't showing up. Let's go see Batman. Like, I mean, really? Really? But that does kind of lend to the thinking of these boys at that time. And then you have the Dr. Oziel angle on all of this, where I definitely think, Eric definitely was having some kind of guilty thoughts about what happened. But here's the other part of it that I've been questioning since I read the coroner's report, where it says that Jose was only shot 6 times, but Kitty was shot 8 times. Or, I'm sorry, 10 times. If Jose was always the target, and yes, Jose definitely had more brutal injuries, so there's definitely some thought to that, right? But yet, Kitty was shot 10 times, and obviously she didn't die as quick as Jose did, because they even said that. She was crawling, gasping for help, screaming for help, and Lyle goes back and again. So there's some credence to think that Jose still was the primary target. But if you look at just the amount of shells that were put into Kitty's back and face and, everywhere else that she got shot, it would almost seem like Kitty was the prime target. Now, while the abuse allegations may have never come out from the boys until the testimony, and we'll get to that in a second, the family definitely had a lot to say about the way that Jose and Kitty treated those kids during interviews. That Jose was an asshole. And that Kitty that's just Jose. That's just how he is. I cannot stop him. And that definitely lends to a lot of the things that the boys said about the way that they grew up. But then not only that, but I mean, you don't have Kitty, you don't just have Kitty's family sitting here saying these things about Jose. You have Jose's family saying these things about Jose. And this is long before the boys were even arrested. And if they had not gone on the $700,000 spending spree that they went on after mom and dad died, the mafia angle probably would have stuck. Because you did have multiple employees at Live Entertainment sitting here saying, yeah, we used to be a pretty major porn distribution company, and back in the 70s and 80s, the mob was porn. That theory probably could have stuck if those boys would have kept their hands off that money. And again, that isn't even inheritance from the will. That is just from estates that the Menendez family had stakes in, that the family members, not Lyle and Eric, the other family members were able to sit there and say, here you go, boys, use this to live off of. Young, dumb, rich kids who are used to having a certain level of privilege because of the way they grew up, and are definitely trying to maintain the lifestyle that they have pretty much always lived, but I think also giving themselves some things that they were never allowed to have because of how much of an asshole and how domineering their father was. Oh, Dad's not here? Bring that Porsche over here. Dad's not here? Slap me them Rolexes. Dad's not here? Let's go to the Caribbean and see if we can find Jack Sparrow. And I know that Jack Sparrow did not exist back in 1990, but I'm just saying, right? They were acting like rich spoiled teenage kids who just got an unlimited bank account. What would you have done? But looking at all the evidence in whole, the weak alibis, the laying in wait, and the fact that they bought the guns 2 days before, the fact that there was never any mention of Jose and Kitty trying to kill them, all of this stuff, and the fact that they were coming up with a cover story, and the fact that they acted so well on that 911 call. Looking at it solely from the evidence and the investigation, the things that we had the friends talk about, the fact that there was a movie named Friends that Eric wrote where a boy kills his parents for inheritance, the fact that within weeks they spent $700,000. Given all the evidence that we have, and yes, even the evidence including that Jose and Kitty were dicks and horrible parents, I still have to say that this was a premeditated, thought-out plan to kill their parents. Maybe not necessarily for money, because like the entire family said, these boys never thought for money, never wanted for anything. But maybe definitely because they were tired of living in mom and dad's shadow. And maybe even, yes, because Jose was an asshole and treated them like shit. So then we move on to what was being testified at in court. Both brothers did share emotional, heart-wrenching stories of abuse at the hands of Jose. Lyle until he was 8, Eric until he was an adult. Family members also testified that Jose was a tyrant, mean, and not very well thought of. Lyle, at one point, also testified that he explained in detail to a cousin about the abuse. That cousin actually did come forward and talked not only to the defense, but also talked to the investigators as well after Lyle made that confession. Oziel's mistress also testified that due to her treatment by Oziel, she was testifying for the defense. And that woman was wackadoo to begin with, so I don't know how much of her I believe. Oziel came off like a true villain during his testimony, mainly for taping the boys under the lull of privilege and attempting to be their friends and just wanting to get everything that they were saying on record. But also for being unethical. The sex abuse charges against, he had the sex abuse charges against him from a former patient. For having a mistress for 2. And then on top of that, for breaking doctor-patient privilege. I keep saying client privilege because of Rich and Stupid, Rob Durst in his case. But for allowing Jose to allow him to break doctor-patient privilege by giving Jose all the notes of their conversations. And then on top of that, his billing practices, which he did admit to on the stand. When you weigh the testimony from the boys against the evidence in the 911 call, you find it very hard to believe the stories of abuse. The testimony feels real when you hear it or when you see it. It feels like they did have these things happen. When you add in what the family members also had to say about Jose, and you add in the stories about times when cousins and all that were staying with the boys, and Jose would be taking either Eric or Lyle into a bedroom and the cousin's sitting here saying, well, hey, I want to play too, and he says, no, go back to bed or I'm going to beat your ass, then there's definitely a way you can think about that and say that this abuse may be real. And then you also add in the story that their aunt shared with police about Jose berating Eric for separating his food during a family dinner and saying that that's something only faggots would do. Are you a faggot? Do you want me to treat you like a faggot? Yeah, you can definitely see that. You can definitely see that this testimony may be real. And at the time, you have to also think about it like this. The family did not know that the boys had confessed to murdering their parents yet. That revelation did not come out until they were about ready to go to trial. And then Leslie Abramson had them sit down with the family and say, we did it. We killed Jose, we killed Kitty, we killed mom and dad. But here's why. And it was after those boys met with an independent psychiatrist that was not on their father's payroll, that was not trying to intimidate them into confessing. And he literally got down to the crux of the situation and basically said, these boys are hiding something. I don't know what, but they are hiding something. Both of them are deathly afraid of coming out and saying something, but they are definitely hiding some kind of deep trauma. And I can tell you from personal experience, somebody who hid deep, damaging trauma for most of his life, the way that those boys were acting and the way that that psychiatrist was describing it when he was on the stand is most definitely the way that someone that has been abused most of their life responds. And I'm going to say this. I have never, ever been sexually assaulted by a family member or otherwise. But I did go through psychological, verbal, and physical abuse at the hands of my parents for most of my life. But you'd still have to look at the evidence that points to premeditation. Buying the guns. Going to multiple stores trying to buy the guns. Using somebody else's ID to purchase the guns. Meaning that neither of those weapons were in a single Menendez's name. Purchasing ammo from different stores. Not wanting to wait the 2 weeks for handguns, buying shotguns instead, because you could take them right there with you. All that adds to premeditation. The brothers also testified that they were afraid of their parents, feared that they were going to kill them for wanting to expose the history of abuse, and the fact that they had started to expose the history of abuse. And that, yes, I can honestly sit there and say, as someone whose father beat the shit out of him for most of his life, you never, ever want to sit there and you never feel safe telling anybody, family or otherwise, what is happening to you. Because you know the second it gets back to the person that's doing it, the beating that you're going to take after that is 9 million times worse than anything you would have gotten if you hadn't told. Period. So when you look at it from both of those angles, an evidentiary angle and a testimony angle, you can kind of see why there would be a mistrial in the original trial. And there was actually a very interesting thing that happened in that original trial, in where the male jurors were the ones that were saying first degree murder, first degree murder, first degree murder, no gray area, no different possibilities of manslaughter, nothing. Whereas the female jurors, it didn't matter if they were older or younger, the female jurors were all manslaughter, manslaughter, manslaughter. Oh my God, their parents were horrible to them. Did you hear the stories they were telling? So there was a very big dynamic like that. And also, the jury in the Menendez case, which I thought was interesting, given all of the media and everything that was going on with the case, was not sequestered. So they could have potentially gone home, turned on the evening news, and seen everything that was being said about the trial and had zero punishment for it. So I found that very interesting, because then you turn right around, and the very next case that's being tried by LA County and in that area is O.J. Simpson. And the jurors, most definitely in the O.J. case, were sequestered. And I think that there was probably just about the same amount of media hype with O.J. as there was with the Menendez brothers. So just a completely different dynamic in those two trials. And we did talk yesterday about how the O.J. case tied into the Menendez case, because after the first Menendez trial, they did the O.J. trial, and then they went back and did Menendez Part 2. And there's a little bit that I want to talk about with the testimony in that one. Because we talked yesterday about how the judge did his damnedest to make sure that a lot of the things that caused the mistrial in the first trial were either greatly reduced in this one, or just not allowed at all in this one. By limiting the number of witnesses the defense was allowed to have, by limiting the talks of abuse by the defense, by not allowing evidence in that was allowed in the first case, limited the defense, by allowing evidence that wasn't allowed in the first case, definitely limited the defense. And if there ever was, you know, and the craziest thing about that whole thing is, and here's why I say that I've never seen this before, right? Another case where a lot of crazy, what the heck shenanigans were going on was the West Memphis 3 case. And it was really hard to try to figure out just what was going on in that case. Where the evidence that existed to say that the 3 people that they felt were responsible for the crime was next to nothing. And then everything else was like circumstantial evidence. If you don't understand circumstantial evidence is evidence that doesn't directly point to the defendants. It is evidence that, because the circumstances of the crime say that this could have happened, or that this could be, a cause, then we're going to say that it's evidence that that happened. I am not the world's biggest fan of circumstantial evidence, because circumstantial evidence could very easily and very quickly turn into fruit of the poisonous tree. And fruit of the poisonous tree is evidence or testimony or anything like that that you are not allowed to use after certain things. Like if certain things happen, like let's say, for example, the detective on the case beat the shit out of one of the witnesses or one of the suspects to coerce a confession. If it comes out and it's discovered that detective beat the shit out of that suspect, then it becomes fruit of the poisonous tree, because that evidence was obtained under false pretenses. So a lot of circumstantial evidence could become fruit of the poisonous tree because of that. And I think that a lot of the stuff that they had, especially when it came to the boys killing their parents for money, definitely falls under the realm of circumstantial evidence, because there was no evidence to support it, which is why the judge originally said we have to remove that as special circumstances in the original trial, because there's no evidence that this was murder for money, or that they were murdering them to get money. Financial gain could not be proven as a motive as to why the Menendez brothers killed their parents. So then for the fact that for the second trial, the same judge flips it and then says, that's going to be our main crux. That's going to be our main argument for the prosecution. I'm kind of sitting there going, hold on, time out. What's going on here? What happened to, we can't prove that. And I will say this, that in between the two trials, Lyle Menendez did nothing to help his case, and makes himself, maybe not necessarily Eric, but Lyle does a lot in between these two trials to make himself sound guilty as fuck, and makes it really hard for anyone, especially me, who likes to give people benefit of the doubt, especially in cases like this, that I can't, it's really hard for me to sit there and be like, bro, like, yeah, I see it. I see the abuse. I see what you're talking about. Me being an abuse survivor, for a minute there, I'm sitting there, I'm like, dude, I just want to hug you because I know what you're going through. I don't know about the sexual part of it, but everything else, it's like, yeah, my dad told me that I should not join the Boy Scouts because you have to tie too many knots. And then I had other people in my family that tell me, oh, don't become a podcaster. You honestly think you can make money off of podcasting? Look, I'm going to be 1,000,000% honest with everybody here. If I was in this for money, I would have quit 4.5 years ago. I'm in this because I like it and because I know I can get an audience. Maybe not for every episode, but that's not the goal. The goal is you put something out there, you hope somebody likes it. If they like it, they're going to tune in next week, maybe. But if you know what your bread and butter ends up being, and I know we're kind of, here a little bit, but I just wanted to say that. But again, it's like I feel with what they were saying that they were going through. They had a shitty father, they had a shitty mother, and I can attest to at least 50% of that. So for the longest time, after I started investigating this a little bit, because for most of my life, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, they lied about being abused by their parents. They killed their parents because they wanted money. Why? Because that's the narrative that has been shoved down our throats since 95 after that second trial. So now that I'm a true crime junkie, I go back and I look at everything. And that's why I had all those pages of stuff. And I looked into it. And I read and I saw and documentaries, docudramas, the Law and Order true crimes, the monsters, all these different things that came out, and we're talking about the case. I'm sitting here and I'm just like, that points to them just wanting to kill their parents. That points to them potentially being abused. That points to this. That points to that. Spending $700,000. Definitely seems like you wanted to kill them for money. But other than that spending spree that they went on, that their family says was just everyday life for the Menendezes, it's kind of hard to prove that. And then the documentary comes out, Menendez and Menudo, where that member of Menudo came out and said that he was drugged and sexually assaulted by Jose Menendez, telling very similar stories to what Eric and Lyle were testifying to in court. There has been zero evidence to say that anybody in the Menendez defense camp, brothers included, reached out to him and said, dude, we need your testimony. There is zero evidence of that. None. So we're running out of time here. So I want to get real quick into the final point of this. Next week, when we get back to being into our every other week scenario. So next week, I'm going to do a show. And if you guys have any questions or want any clarification on anything that I'm talking about here tonight, send a direct message to the Money's Crazy Mind or Kezi Production pages on Facebook. I will copy your questions down and we will answer them next week. I promise. Okay? We kind of touched on it a little bit, where the men said capital murder, women said manslaughter. A lot of that is because back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a gigantic stigma that boys, men, could not be victims of sexual assault. Because there's always the possibility, there was always the thought out there that a man could overpower their abusers and could potentially stop it. So seeing as how men were willing to adopt that theory, but the women were not. It was a very motherly instinct. Oh my God, these poor boys, they were treated like crap. I could see definitely why they'd want to put bullets in their parents' heads because of the way that they were treated. Whereas the men were just like, fuck that, they're men. And even the prosecutor in the second case questioned Eric as to why he was 18 years old, he had a car, he had money, why didn't he just leave? I can answer that question. Because even though he was 18 years old, we know Jose had to have his hands in everything that Eric and Lyle did. Lyle was only allowed to work for the companies that Jose worked in. He was only allowed to work in the family business. Lyle wanted to start chicken wing stands and take them nationwide and everything like that because everybody loves chicken wings. Eric wanted to be a tennis player, but that's what his father wanted for him. So, of course, anything involving tennis, Dad was going to fork out the money for. But him sitting there saying, Dad, I'm tired of you sticking your dick in my ass and I'm going to move out, that was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. And the other members of the family even attested to that. But then, over the years, that stigma slowly started to change. So seeing as how the stigma against men and sexual abuse being victims of sexual abuse has changed over the years, it's no surprise to me or to anybody that the thought processes into the fact that these boys could have definitely been sexually assaulted by their father, and mom just sitting there going, ain't that far-fetched anymore. And that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing. I'm saying that right now. But as to what my final thought onto whether or not this was murder or manipulation, there's a lot of evidence that definitely leans toward murder. Do I think that they were in imminent danger from their parents? Yes. Do I think that there is at least a reasonable doubt that this could have been self-defense? Yes. Do I feel that this is a better case for manslaughter than murder? No. And here's why. They were going for maximum carnage, and they wanted to make sure that their parents were dead. And they definitely were able to do that because we see it. 10 shots to Kitty, 6 to Jose. Jose barely had a face. And his brain was eviscerated. That's carnage. And then you also have to think about the fact that Lyle went back even after he found out that his mother was still alive and put 4 more in her. That's maximum carnage. Do I agree in the abuse allegations? 50-50. The sexual abuse is where I have a hard time believing it. I know I've listened to victims' testimony. I've listened to victims' interviews. I've listened to all of it. They sound like victims. But at the same time, as we talked about yesterday, they're very good at acting. Do I think that their parents were assholes and treated them like shit and most definitely verbally abused them and probably did physically abuse them, as we heard from stories from family members? 100%. It's the sexual abuse that I have a hard time believing, and it's only because they're such good actors. And Leslie Abramson, their attorney, has a history of cases where the victims, or they're not even victims, well, they may be. It's very hard to put a on this, right? Where all of her defendants were conveniently sexually abused, and they were able to get away with manslaughter self-defense charges for murdering their parents. So that's why I have a little bit of a hard time believing it. And the so-called independent psychologist that came in and interviewed Eric and Lyle before the trial, is one that Leslie Abramson is known to use. So that's why I have a little bit of a hard time with the sexual abuse part of it, but also because Lyle's attorney was not really on board with it before Leslie Abramson took over the defense. Psych Ward's telling me it's time to get out of here. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the Money's Crazy Mind All Hallows Eve Spooktacular 2024 on Facebook, YouTube, and for the first time ever, Kezi Radio. Until next week, everybody, this is Halloween. Keep your babysitters locked up. Michael Myers is coming home tonight. Until then, have a good one.
Money's Crazy Mind is proud to be the exclusive flagship broadcast of Nameless, Faceless Productions.
That's all, folks.
Warning. Money's Crazy Mind contains language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised, but will be completely ignored.
I'm sick of it, doing right, doing wrong. Parents pissed off every time I write a song. Smoke, crack, worship Satan, what the fuck is that? It's something funny, made for you to laugh at.
You're destroying America with your rap.
You're so full of shit, I need to call hazmat. The only way I would ever apologize
I gotta go
if
on
I
record
had
with
my
this,
face
alright?
buried
I
in your
really
sister's
do.
thighs.
Never in 39 years have I ever seen anything like
Okay, I'm sorry
It
for what
shows
it's worth,
the
but the best
fanaticism
part of you was the
of this fan
afterbirth.
base and
If you
crazy
can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. Na 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 na
Into the
na
return
na
of
na
sin.
na, and I fucked your
To the point
sister.
where you
You
overshadowed
can't
the
take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. La 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 la
That it was
la
kind
la
of,
la,
for me,
and I fucked your sister.
if you want to continue to put this narrative out there that Cody finishing the story
What the fuck, dude?
Hey,
is
yo,
this
he's talking
big
shit. What the
daunting
fuck
task,
is this? Hey,
and
this
Cody
talking
has
shit.
all these
Run
mountains
your
to
mouth.
climb and
This
all
is
these
what you're
brass
gonna
rings
get.
to
Screwdriver
climb.
jam in your
And of course, we
fucking
gotta
eye.
thank our
So
official
long.
music
Think
sponsor,
I'm coming
Psych
by.
Ward,
Tell your
for the
sister
continued
I'll be
use
over by
of
10 with my dick in
funny
the mouth and my balls on the chin. She's